Welcome. Today we are undertaking a comprehensive analysis of the musical landscape of the 2020s. We're looking at the period ranging from the very start of the decade right through to the mid-2020s, covering all the major events leading up to our current vantage point in early 2026.
Right.
This has been a decade completely defined by disruption. We have a lot of sources to pull from, industry reports, chart data, and market analyses, and our mission today is to distill all of that down for you. We want to show you how massive monocultural events collided with these hyper-niche internet trends.
It is a period that began with the industry coming to an absolute halt and then accelerating in directions that, frankly, very few analysts predicted.
Yeah, exactly. To understand the industry as it stands for you in 2026, we really have to establish the contextual foundation. And that starts with the immediate impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. The decade basically began with a total shutdown of the live music sector.
It was an economic catastrophe for the touring industry.
Right. It wasn't just a pause. We saw the cancellation, or at best, the indefinite postponement of major tours that had been projected to generate record revenues. I mean, the planned stadium tour, co-headlined by Mötley Crüe and Def Leppard.
And the highly anticipated Rage Against the Machine reunion tour.
Yes, that one too. They simply vanished from the calendar.
The financial implications of that were severe. Touring is the primary revenue stream for legacy artists and also for the entire ecosystem of crews, venues, and promoters that support them.
Absolutely.
When that revenue stream evaporated, it forced an immediate pivot. The isolation necessitated by the pandemic created a vacuum that simply had to be filled by virtual experiences. Artists were required to innovate rapidly just to maintain visibility.
We saw some pretty significant experiments in that space. Dua Lipa's Studio 2054 comes to mind.
Yes, that was a high-production live stream attempting to replicate the club experience for a remote audience.
And on the other end of the spectrum, you had Taylor Swift's Long Pond studio sessions. That offered a very intimate documentary-style performance that catered specifically to the introspective mood everyone was feeling at the time.
These were essential attempts to maintain a connection with an audience that was physically isolated. But this period of isolation also fueled a structural shift in consumer behavior. Analysts describe it as genreless music consumption.
Right, because without the social signaling of clubs or concerts or festivals, listeners began to heavily fragment their listening habits. The data you look at suggests that choices became based purely on mood and algorithmic recommendation rather than traditional genre loyalty.
The mechanism for that consumption shifted almost entirely toward TikTok.
It's impossible to analyze the music of the early 2020s without dissecting how that application functioned. I mean, it became the primary tastemaker for Generation Z and Generation Alpha.
It shifted the paradigm from passive listening to active interaction. A song's success was no longer solely about its composition.
No, it was about its utility. It was about content creation. You had comedy skits, memes, dance routines, makeup tutorials. Those became the actual vehicles for chart success.
Which created a brand new pipeline for talent discovery.
Yeah, the viral to sign phenomenon. It became the standard operating procedure for A&R departments at all the major labels. You'd see relatively unknown artists pulled entirely from obscurity simply because a 15-second snippet of their song resonated in a specific context on the app.
The influence was undeniable.
Yeah.
In September 2023, a specific Billboard chart was created just to track those viral audios.
But there is a distinct paradox here that we need to point out for you. While digital consumption via short-form video was dominating the attention economy, we saw a massive resurgence in physical media. It completely defied the digital trend.
That is a critical data point. In 2020, vinyl records outsold CDs for the first time since 1986.
Which is wild to think about.
The revenue share was 28.7% for vinyl versus 23% for CDs. And this trend continued to accelerate, even as streaming subscriptions grew, which helped the industry reach a revenue milestone of $8.4 billion by mid-2023. Consumer behavior showed a distinctly bifurcated market.
It really indicates a desire for tangible ownership. You know, in an era where digital content feels ephemeral and can just be removed from platforms at any given time, the physical object holds immense value. The vinyl record basically became a merchandise item.
It is a way to signal identity and fandom.
Exactly. This duality, the hyper-fast digital consumption paired with slow physical collection, it set the stage for the massive success of the pop monoliths we saw emerge.
And no figure illustrates this domination more clearly than Taylor Swift.
Let us examine the era of Taylor Swift in detail, because her dominance throughout the 2020s has been statistically unprecedented.
It has.
It started with the surprise releases of Folklore and Evermore during the pandemic. Then it moved through the massive commercial success of Midnights and continued with the Tortured Poets department. And then, of course, in 2025, she released The Life of a Showgirl.
The commercial performance of The Life of a Showgirl is historically significant. Selling over 4 million copies in its first week is a statistic that is a complete anomaly in the modern streaming era.
It really is.
It suggests that her audience operates with a level of economic loyalty that far surpasses casual listening. It is participation in a narrative.
And a major component of that narrative was the Eras Tour. It wasn't simply a concert run. It was a cultural and economic phenomenon that spanned multiple years. Alongside the new material, she executed a strategy of re-recordings that fundamentally changed how legacy content is valued.
The Taylor's Versions project was a strategic masterclass. It was initially initiated as a method to reclaim ownership of her master recordings, but commercially, it proved that legacy content could completely outperform new releases from other artists.
I mean, 1989 Taylor's Version scored the highest first-week sales of 2023.
Yes, this is an album of songs that the public had already known for a decade, yet the re-recording captured the market entirely.
It really highlights the power of narrative. Fans were buying into a story of artist autonomy. But while Swift maintained her position at the apex of the industry, the mid-2020s also saw the rise of a new pop vanguard.
Olivia Rodrigo is consistently cited as the most significant breakthrough act of the early decade.
Her trajectory from the debut single Driver's License to the Guts era completely reshaped the pop landscape, especially by reintegrating elements of pop punk and alternative rock.
Her success with Sour and Guts indicated a strong revival of rock aesthetics within the mainstream pop sphere. She effectively channeled the specific teenage angst that resonated globally.
But we also saw the ascent of Sabrina Carpenter. Her rise provides a very different case study for you to consider because it wasn't instantaneous.
It was a gradual build. She served as an opening act for the Eras Tour, which provided massive exposure. That led directly to the breakout success of Short and Sweet in 2024.
And she capitalized on that momentum so effectively. In 2025, she released the album Man's Best Friend, and the lead single Man-Child hit #1 immediately. It demonstrates a very steady, highly strategic climb to the top tier of pop.
Then there was Chappell Roan. The industry described her success as a slow burn that eventually ignited into a massive phenomenon.
Chappell Roan's trajectory with the rise and fall of a Midwest princess is a true testament to the power of word of mouth and live performance.
It was not an overnight viral hit in the traditional sense. It was a gradual accumulation of a highly dedicated fan base that appreciated her theatricality and camp aesthetic.
Right, which culminated in her winning Best New Artist at the 67th Grammys. Her 2025 hits, The Giver and The Subway, just solidified her status. And her music, along with some others, connects to a broader trend identified in the early 2020s. The industry called it Sad Girl Autumn.
That term appeared frequently in cultural commentary. It refers to melancholic, introspective music usually released in the autumn months. It serves as a counterpoint to the high-energy music typically promoted in the summer.
The industry noted Adele's album 30, Mitski's Laurel Hell, and Phoebe Bridgers' Punisher as the key examples of this trend. It suggests a distinct seasonal cyclicality to music consumption.
But we should also analyze the legacy acts that maintain relevance. It was not just new artists dominating the charts.
No, absolutely not. Miley Cyrus experienced a massive resurgence with the track Flowers. She won at the 66th and 67th Grammys and then released the album Something Beautiful in 2025.
Lady Gaga also continued to evolve. From the Chromatica era to her collaboration with Bruno Mars on Die With a Smile, and then her 2025 album Mayhem.
Which won Best Pop Vocal Album at the 68th Grammys?
These artists have proven highly adaptable.
Harry Styles is another primary example. Harry's House was a commercial juggernaut, and his Love on Tour set grossing records worldwide. Even into 2026, his single Aperture from the album Kiss All the Time. Disco occasionally shows that the established pop stars from the late 2010s were able to carry their momentum very deep into the 2020s.
Dua Lipa as well. Future nostalgia served as the soundtrack for many during the pandemic, and she followed it with the strong commercial performance of Radical Optimism.
Now, moving from the pop sphere over to hip-hop, the narrative of the 2020s is quite dramatic. The early part of the decade saw a persistent conversation among analysts about a slump in hip-hop sales and streaming dominance.
There was a genuine question within the industry about whether the genre was losing its grip on the dominant culture. The data showed a subtle decline in streaming market share for hip-hop in the early 2020s, especially when compared to the explosive growth it experienced in the previous decade.
However, the genre was revitalized, or perhaps convulsed is a better word, by what became known as the Civil War of the mid-2020s. This was the defining event: Drake versus Kendrick Lamar.
It escalated into something far beyond a typical rap rivalry.
It really did. We are reporting impartially on the sources here, but the allegations exchanged were extremely severe. We saw claims of inappropriate behavior directed at Drake and accusations of cultural appropriation thrown back and forth.
The tracks themselves commanded the cultural conversation for months. You had Push-Ups and Family Matters from Drake, positioned against Euphoria, Meet the Grams, and the massive hit Not Like Us from Kendrick Lamar.
Not Like Us was the pivot point for the entire feud. It was unique because it functioned as a direct attack, but simultaneously became a massive radio hit and a club anthem.
It is statistically rare for a song so focused on dismantling an opponent's character to achieve such widespread commercial appeal. The fallout was significant on a business level.
Drake actually filed a legal petition against Universal Music Group regarding streaming manipulation.
Yes, he claimed that the charts were being artificially inflated by the label to favor Lamar. It demonstrated the exceptionally high stakes and business ramifications of this conflict.
And looking at the accolades, Kendrick Lamar appeared to secure the victory in the public eye. He swept the Grammys, taking Record and Song of the Year for Not Like Us at the 67th Awards. And then there was his Super Bowl performance, which analysts viewed as the total solidification of that win.
While the male superstars were locked in that conflict, the 2020s also saw a massive explosion in female rap. The slump mentioned earlier simply did not apply to the women in the genre.
That is a crucial distinction for you to keep in mind. Megan Thee Stallion was a dominant force early in the decade, and she continued that momentum with her 2024 hit Hiss.
Doja Cat made a fascinating transition as well, from the viral pop rap of Say So to a much more rap-focused sound in her Scarlet era. Her track Paint the Town Red hit #1.
We also saw the rapid rise of Ice Spice via the track Munch, followed by a major Taylor Swift remix, and her involvement with the Barbie World soundtrack.
And notably, Doki winning Best Rap Album for Alligator Bites Never Heal at the 67th Grammys. That was a historic win.
It signals a real shift in the critical appreciation of female rappers, moving beyond just commercial viability to recognizing immense artistic merit in album construction. Within hip-hop, there were also specific subgenres that bubbled up from the underground. Rage rap became very prominent.
Yes, featuring artists like Playboi Carti with his album Whole Lotta Red, alongside Yeat, Ken Carson, and Destroy Lonely.
The rage sound is characterized by extremely high energy. It uses distorted beats, synth-heavy production, and very abrasive vocals. Much of this centered around the Opium label aesthetic, which Playboi Carti cultivated.
It is a sound that translates very well to live environments, specifically mosh pits. This appealed heavily to a post-lockdown audience looking for physical release.
Another fascinating subgenre mentioned in the analysis is drift funk. This has a very specific origin story.
Drift funk originated largely from producers in Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. It exploded via TikTok, specifically through automotive content.
Right, videos of cars drifting.
Exactly. The sound is high-tempo and utilizes cowbells and heavily distorted vocals, drawing very directly from 1990s Memphis rap tapes.
It became so popular that Spotify actually created official curation for it in 2021. It is a prime example of how an internet subculture can drive a highly specific microgenre into the global consciousness.
Let us pivot to country music. The 2020s were the decade where country truly took over the mainstream in the United States.
It really shifted from being a massive but regional bubble to being the dominant genre on the all-genre charts. The key data point here occurred in August 2023. For the first time in the entire history of the Billboard Hot 100, the top 3 spots were occupied entirely by country songs.
You had Jason Aldean, Morgan Wallen, and Luke Combs holding those positions simultaneously. That was a clear, undeniable signal that the genre had fully crossed over into the pop consciousness.
Morgan Wallen was a complete juggernaut in this regard. His albums Dangerous the Double Album and One Thing at a Time dominated the Billboard 200 for weeks on end. We are talking about streaming numbers that rivaled the biggest pop and hip-hop stars in the world.
But we also saw major pop and cultural icons entering the country space. Beyoncé's album Cowboy Carter in 2024 was a massive industry-shifting moment.
Cowboy Carter, and specifically the single Texas Hold'em hitting #1, sparked a very significant cultural conversation regarding the origins of the genre.
There was significant controversy regarding the CMA Awards snubbing the project entirely. This stood in stark contrast to her domination at the Grammys, where the project won Album of the Year.
It highlighted the ongoing tension between the traditional Nashville industry and the broader cultural appreciation of the genre's Black roots. And we saw Casey Musgraves also navigating that tension between tradition and evolution.
She experienced the genre debate over her album Star-Crossed, but then returned to a more folk-centric sound with Deeper Well in 2024. That move resulted in her winning Best Country Song at the 67th Grammys.
And we absolutely must analyze the Oliver Anthony moment.
That was a true statistical anomaly. The track Rich Men North of Richmond went viral, and Oliver Anthony became the first male solo act to chart 13 songs simultaneously while still alive.
That is an incredibly rare feat. It's usually reserved for artists like Prince or Michael Jackson immediately following their deaths.
It demonstrated the power of viral political or social sentiment to drive massive consumption entirely outside of the traditional label system.
Moving on to rock and alternative. The 2020s saw a very strong pop-punk revival. We touched on Olivia Rodrigo's role in this earlier, but it was much broader than just her output.
The track Good For You was certainly a catalyst.
Yeah.
But we also saw Machine Gun Kelly transition fully into a pink pop-punk aesthetic with his album Tickets to My Downfall.
Paramore also returned with the album This Is Why. They won Grammys and really reminded the public of their foundational role in that specific sound. It was a complete resurgence of 2000s aesthetics, repackaged for a new generation.
Simultaneously, there was a very different rock trend happening with Generation Z. There was a sudden obsession with shoegaze.
Which was incredibly unexpected. Shoegaze is a genre from the early 90s. It's characterized by a wall of sound and very buried vocals, yet it resonated deeply with Gen Z.
Analysts attribute this to the bleak, post-COVID world feeling. The sound matches a certain dissociative mood. New acts like Wisp, Julie, and Jane Remover carried this torch. They blended the classic shoegaze sound with modern internet aesthetics.
Over in the UK, specifically in South London, we saw the rise of the windmill scene.
Named after the Windmill pub in Brixton. This was a significant movement for post-punk and experimental rock.
Bands like Black Midi, Black Country, New Roads, Squid, and The Last Dinner Party emerged directly from this environment. It is widely cited as one of the most significant creative rock movements of the entire decade.
It is characterized by spoken word vocals and very complex experimental instrumentation.
And speaking of rock history, we had some major legacy moments in the 2020s. The Oasis reunion in 2025 was absolutely massive.
The ticket demand was chaotic, and it sparked a measurable revival of lad culture in the UK. It proved that Britpop nostalgia remained a highly potent economic force.
We also saw the release of the final Beatles song, Now and Then, in 2023. They used AI technology to complete an old John Lennon demo. And on a more somber note, the final reunion of Black Sabbath, followed by Ozzy Osbourne's death in 2025, marked the definitive end of an era for heavy metal.
These events mark a closing of the chapter for the 20th century rock giants, even as the genre itself continues to mutate through the younger bands we just discussed.
Now, let us look at the global soundscape. The 2020s were the decade where English-language dominance on the charts really began to erode in a permanent way. Latin music, in particular, exploded.
Bad Bunny was the clear forerunner here. His album Un Verano Sin Ti was a global phenomenon. But the more specific trend to note is the rise of regional Mexican music.
This genre modernized rapidly. It started incorporating elements of trap and urban music, often referred to as corridos tumbados.
Artists like Peso Pluma, Eslabon Armado, and Grupo Frontera took this sound from a regional niche straight to the top of the Billboard Hot 100.
The track Ella Baila Sola was quite literally everywhere.
It represented a major shift. Latin pop was no longer the primary export. These very specific regional sounds were finding a massive global audience. It mirrors the fragmentation we see elsewhere in the industry. Authenticity to a specific region became a selling point globally.
In Asia, K-pop continued its immense global scaling. BTS and Blackpink remained dominant, but by 2025 and 2026, we saw the next generation taking over. We're talking about New Jeans and Stray Kids specifically.
And J-pop finally broke the international barrier in a highly significant way. For a long time, the Japanese music market was notoriously insular.
But tracks like Yoasobi's Idol and the enormous success of Kenshi Yonezu in 2025 showed that Japanese artists could chart globally. This was very often driven by the popularity of anime culture.
We also saw Afrobeats become a standard fixture in Western pop.
It is no longer categorized as world music. It is simply pop music now. Rima's track Calm Down with Selena Gomez was a massive, inescapable radio hit.
Tyla's song Water and the broader influence of Thames solidified the genre's place in the mainstream. The rhythm of Afrobeats has now been integrated directly into the production of countless Western pop songs.
Finally, let us look at electronic, R&B, and the major shifts in technology. R&B saw a massive renaissance, particularly with SCA.
SCA's SOS era was a commercial juggernaut. The track Kill Bill broke multiple chart records, and her longevity on the charts was remarkable for the modern era.
In 2026, she won a Grammy with Kendrick Lamar for the track Luther, which just kept her incredible momentum going. The Weeknd also concluded his long-running trilogy with the album Hurry Up Tomorrow, easily maintaining his status as a top streaming artist globally.
In the electronic world, 2024 was unequivocally the year of Brat Summer, driven by Charlie XCX.
The album Brat created a very specific, undeniable cultural aesthetic. It was messy, it was party-focused, and it was entirely internet native. It drove a massive amount of engagement beyond just the music itself.
We also saw a strong revival of drum and bass. Artists like Pink Pantheress and Kenya Grace brought that fast breakbeat sound right back to the top of the charts.
And Jersey Club went completely mainstream.
Yes. That specific triplet kick drum pattern from New Jersey was adopted by everyone from Lil Uzi Vert to Drake. It was even heavily integrated into K-pop production.
It really shows how a hyper-local sound can become a global production standard almost overnight. We must also discuss the impact of technology and film on music. The Barbie effect on soundtracks was highly significant.
The Barbie movie effectively revived the compilation soundtrack format. For a long time, traditional soundtracks had become much less relevant to the charts.
But Barbie produced massive chart hits for Billie Eilish, Dua Lipa, and even Ryan Gosling. It proved that a curated album attached to a film could still drive culture if executed correctly.
And then there is the looming topic: artificial intelligence in music.
By 2024, tools like Udio and Suno were on a massive rise. We began to see the very real tension between copyright, human artistry, and generative generation.
It raised fundamental questions about the value of human creation. This is something that the industry is still actively grappling with in 2026.
So if we look at the overarching vibe of the 2020s so far, it is a decade completely defined by fragmentation. We have microgenres like drift funk and hyperpop coexisting directly with massive monocultural events like the Eras Tour or the Drake and Kendrick beef.
It is the collapsing of time. Old music, artists like Kate Bush and Fleetwood Mac chart right alongside brand new music. This happens because streaming algorithms and TikTok simply do not distinguish between 1985 and 2025. It is all just categorized as content now.
Which effectively means that every song ever recorded is competing simultaneously with every new release.
Exactly. This leads to the playlistification of listening habits. The specific artist matters less than the overall vibe or the utility of the track.
I want to expand on the implications of that playlistification for you. When we talk about music as a utility, we are describing a fundamental shift in the relationship between the listener and the art. It is less about saying, I am a fan of this band, and much more about saying, I need a background track for studying, or I need high BPM for running.
That is a crucial observation. The streaming services have completely optimized for this behavior. If you look at the most popular playlists, they are very often titled things like Lo-Fi Beats to Study To or Gym Pump.
The artist name becomes entirely secondary to the function of the music. This environment makes it incredibly difficult for new artists to build a recognizable name brand unless they can break out of that background utility and create a moment of active engagement, which is usually through video content.
Which brings us back to the importance of the visual element. We discussed TikTok earlier, but it is worth noting how this visual requirement impacts the artists themselves. There is a heavily documented fatigue among musicians who feel they are now required to be full-time content creators.
The label expectation has completely shifted. In previous decades, an artist's job was to write, record, and tour. Now, the modern contract often implicitly includes a strict requirement for daily social media output.
This naturally favors artists who are extroverted or comfortable with a camera in their face. It perhaps disadvantages those who are more enigmatic or reclusive. It changes the required personality type of the modern pop star.
Let us reconsider the physical media paradox we touched on at the very beginning. We mentioned vinyl, but there was also a notable rise in CD sales among Gen Z in the mid-2020s, as well as a return to cassette tapes.
The cassette tape revival is particularly interesting. Objectively, it is a much lower fidelity format, but it offers a very specific aesthetic, a tactile mechanical experience.
For a generation raised entirely on touchscreens, the mechanical act of rewinding a tape or dropping a needle on a record offers a sensory engagement that a digital file completely lacks. It is also heavily about the merch aspect.
Fans want to support their favorite artists directly. They're aware that streaming pays fractions of a cent per listen. Buying a physical item is a way to directly patronize the artist.
Speaking of patronizing the artist, let us delve much deeper into the pure economics of the Eras Tour. We mentioned it was a phenomenon, but the sheer scale of it is worth detailing for you. It was the first tour in history to cross the billion-dollar gross mark.
The economic impact was so uniquely large that it was actually noted in the Federal Reserve's Beige Book. The influx of tourism to cities hosting the tour caused measurable, massive spikes in hotel revenues and local spending.
It essentially operated like a traveling Super Bowl. This level of economic power gives an artist like Taylor Swift immense leverage, not just with record labels, but with the actual venues and ticket distributors.
It contrasts very sharply with the struggles of the mid-tier touring market. While the stadium acts are breaking historic records, smaller venues and mid-level bands have reported increasing difficulties. This is largely due to inflation and rising visa costs.
That is what analysts call the hollowing out of the middle class in music. You have the mega stars at the absolute top and the hobbyists at the bottom. But the career path for the working class musician, the one who tours clubs and theaters to make a living, has become much steeper.
The costs of touring, gas, bus rentals, crew wages, they all spiked severely post-pandemic. It made it much harder just to break even on a standard tour.
Let us return to the hip-hop civil war and the specifics of the UMG lawsuit we mentioned. Drake's legal contention was that the label was using bots or payola to artificially inflate Kendrick's streaming numbers.
Whether true or not, the fact that a major artist would sue his own distribution partner suggests a very deep mistrust in the modern system.
It really pulls back the curtain on the black box of streaming numbers. The industry completely relies on these charts as the ultimate truth. But if the artists themselves are questioning the validity of the data, it destabilizes the entire ecosystem.
It also highlights the deeply personal nature of the feud. It wasn't just about exchanging lyrics. It was an active attempt at destroying the opponent's commercial standing.
And the Not Like Us music video, it was an absolute victory lap. It featured cameos from figures like DeMar DeRozan and others, firmly planting the flag in West Coast culture. It was a visual consolidation of his win.
It was also a masterclass in regional unity. Kendrick managed to unite various sets and neighborhoods in Los Angeles for that video production. It heavily reinforced his image as a man of the people. This contrasted sharply with the accusations of inauthenticity leveled at Drake.
We briefly mentioned Sigma Funk alongside Drift Funk earlier. For the uninitiated listening, can we distinguish between those two microgenres?
They are related but distinct sonically. Drift Funk is much more chaotic and lo-fi. Sigma Funk is cleaner, slower, and often features a standard four-on-the-floor beat.
It basically became the default soundtrack for Sigma male memes. That is, content highly focused on stoicism, gym culture, and self-improvement. It is aggressive music, but very controlled.
It is fascinating how these microgenres are tied so tightly to specific internet subcultures. You truly cannot separate the music from the meme it accompanies.
That is the defining characteristic of 2020's music right there. Context is everything. A song might not make any sense on traditional radio, but if it is placed over a specific type of viral video, it becomes a global hit instantly. Let us expand on the country crossover. We mentioned Rich Men North of Richmond. The lyrical content was highly political.
It touched heavily on taxes, welfare, and elite control.
It polarized listeners immediately upon release. Some saw it as a genuine, unfiltered anthem of the working class. Others criticized it heavily for punching down, but the controversy itself was the exact engine of its immense success.
In the algorithmic era, engagement, whether purely positive or fiercely negative, drives visibility. The song essentially became a proxy for a much broader political debate in the U.S.
And Beyoncé's Cowboy Carter was in many ways an academic response to the recorded history of country music. She specifically brought in legacy figures like Linda Martell.
Linda Martell was the first black woman to play the Grand Ole Opry. By including her in the project, Beyoncé was drawing a direct, undeniable line to the often forgotten history of black contributions to country music.
It was an album that required the listener to do homework. It wasn't just a pop country record, it was an active reclaiming of musical heritage. Let us look closer at the windmill scene in London. We mentioned the band Black Midi. Their sound is very often described as prog or avant-garde.
It is highly challenging music for the average listener. It features complex time signatures, dissonant chords, and extreme dynamic shifts from whispers to full screaming.
The fact that this specific sound found a large audience among young people suggests a deep boredom with the polished, auto-tuned perfection of mainstream pop. There's a clear hunger for messiness and high technical proficiency.
We also saw the rise of the Last Spinner Party from that same ecosystem. Their single, Nothing Matters, was a massive indie hit globally.
They brought a very Baroque theatrical aesthetic to the forefront. Velvet, corsets, heavy melodrama. It fits perfectly with the Chappell Roan trend of high drama.
It is a total rejection of the chill vibe that dominated the late 2010s. They want to be loud and overtly expressive.
Let us discuss the Latin explosion in more granular detail. Peso Pluma's vocal style is very distinct. It is highly nasal and very raw.
It is polarizing to some, but it registers as incredibly authentic. And the specific instrumentation of the cuidos tumbados is key to understanding its rise. It is entirely acoustic.
They use the tololoche, the stand-up bass, the bajo sexto 12-string guitar, and heavy brass like trombones. In a musical landscape dominated by synthesized beats, that organic wood and brass sound cuts right through the noise. It feels fundamentally human.
And the collaboration between these regional Mexican artists and Western stars accelerated the trend.
Right.
We saw Peso Pluma working directly with AP Rocky, for example.
The cross-pollination is just massive. Bad Bunny collaborating with Drake or Grupo Frontera working with Bad Bunny. These collaborations are highly strategic for everyone involved.
They allow artists to cross-pollinate their distinct fan bases.
Right.
It effectively creates a global super audience.
We touched on K-pop, but I want to highlight the specific production shifts that occurred. New Jeans worked with producers directly from the underground club scene.
They utilized producers who were actively making Baltimore club and Jersey club music. This gave their pop tracks a very hip, rhythmic edge,
which appealed directly to Western critics and clubgoers, not just the traditional K-pop fandom. It massively expanded their demographic reach. And with J-pop, the anime connection is absolutely vital to understand. Idol by Yoasobi was the opening theme for the show Oshinoko.
Anime has become a primary vehicle for global music discovery. As anime popularity surged on major streaming platforms like Netflix and Crunchyroll, the opening and closing themes naturally became massive international hits.
It is a sync licensing goldmine for the Japanese music industry. Now, looking back at the Barbie effect on soundtracks, it wasn't just a random collection of songs thrown together. It was a highly cohesive pop album produced by Mark Ronson.
Mark Ronson's curation was essential to its success. He ensured that the songs, while performed by vastly different artists, all shared a distinct sonic DNA.
It sounded exactly like the movie felt. It proved definitively that the soundtrack album, which had been dormant as a major commercial format for years, could still be a blockbuster event if executed with a singular vision.
Finally, let us look at the AI issue again. We mentioned platforms like Suno and Udio.
These tools allow a user to type a simple prompt, like sad country song about a truck, and get a fully produced, completely mixed track in a matter of seconds.
This is the ultimate democratization of creation. But simultaneously, it is the severe devaluation of musical skill. If anyone can create a good enough song in 10 seconds, the market becomes instantly flooded with infinite content.
The major challenge for human artists moving forward will be to provide what the AI simply cannot generate: a real backstory, a physical presence, and a genuine, lived emotional connection.
It seems the fundamental role of the artist is actively shifting. It is moving from just being a music maker to having to be a complete world builder.
Exactly. You cannot just sell a good song anymore. You have to sell an entire universe, a distinct personality, and a compelling reason for the listener to care about you specifically, not just the sound waves you produce. Here's a final thought for you to consider as we wrap up this analysis. If AI can perfectly replicate the sound of a 2020s pop hit, will the 2030s see a total rejection of recorded music in favor of strictly live, unamplified performances? It's something to think about. It has been a truly transformative 6 years. From the total silence of the lockdown to the roar of the Eras Tour and the infinite noise of the algorithm.
And it is only accelerating from here. The next half of the decade will likely be defined by exactly how the industry regulates or ultimately fails to regulate generative AI.
A completely fascinating time to be a listener. Thanks for listening.